religion, give me that old-time religion, give me that old-time religion. It's good enough for me. Let us pray with Aphrodite. Let us pray with Aphrodite. She wears that see-through nightie, and it's good enough for me. Oh, give me that old-time religion, give me that old-time religion, give me that old-time religion. It's good enough for me.
So, going this late in the day after all these amazing speakers, it doesn't leave very much to say. So bear with me. Look, John Scopes, of course, charged with the crime of teaching evolution, actually the crime of teaching anything about where humans come from other than what it says in the book of Genesis. This, of course, is that you heard a lot about, Darrow questioning Brian on the witness stand after getting Brian to proclaim himself an expert in the Bible and then baiting him into being cross-examined about it. Damn lawyers. So you saw a dramatization of it in Inherit the Wind. The movie and the play were written as a response to the post-war Red Scare. Joseph McCarthy, the House Un-American Activities Committee, finding communists lurking under every bed. So they're a celebration of free speech and rationality, right? But, of course, Scopes lost. He was convicted of the crime of teaching evolution and fined $100. That, by the way, if you're interested, is $1,837 today on a teacher's salary. Figure it out. The Tennessee Supreme Court overturned the sentence on a technicality but upheld the conviction. So no teaching of evolution became the law of the land, and evolution was written right out of the science textbooks for decades. But what I want to talk about is why the religiously based hostility to evolutionary theory, to Darwin, and to give you another slice of that. So this is a modern textbook by a creationist group called Answers in Genesis, and it's pretty typical of creationist materials. Here is how Answers in Genesis explains what the heck is wrong with evolution. The great threat to society is moral relativism. I know it's hard to read. It's the social concept of relative morality is based on evolutionary doctrine. If man is a product of random cosmic accidents, then man should be able to decide what is right and wrong, if right and wrong even exist in humanist philosophy. The problem is that there is no basis for deciding what point of view is right or wrong. The Bible provides absolute truth and authority for making moral decisions. Absolute truth. The Bible isn't allegory. It isn't a guide to spiritual truths. It's a history textbook. It's a science textbook. It's true literally in every detail. No room for interpretation. No need for critical thinking. You just obey. On this view, though, it turns out that there's a problem. And the problem is this. If the Bible isn't literally true in every detail, then it's all a big lie. It's just moral code is just made up. And in other words, if evolution is true, the Bible must be false, God doesn't exist, and therefore there is no right or wrong. It's God or Darwin. You can't have both. So that's Christian fundamentalism, which was an innovation of the 1880s. Fundamentalism, that was the name the movement gave itself. Get back to the fundamentals. Give us clear, easy answers to hard questions about how we should live when life is confusing. Now, in our nation's history, rises in Christian fundamentalism have come as backlash in periods of rapid social change. So the 1880s, what do we have going on? The Industrial Revolution, the rural to urban movement. We had leftover displacements from the Civil War that had turned into these broad demographic shifts. So give me that old-time religion. The song was originally written, by the way, in 1889, though not with the lyrics that I played for you. Except fundamentalism wasn't old-time religion. It was, in fact, an entirely new theology. The idea of reading the Bible for yourself, that went back to the Reformation, to Martin Luther. But biblical literalism, the don't analyze, just obey, that was in fact new. Now, after the 1880s, things settled down a bit, And Christian fundamentalism kind of waned. Didn't disappear, but, it was less common. Until the 1920s, soldiers were returning from World War I. After being exposed to new ideas and different ways of living in Europe, society had to absorb them. Brenda told us a whole bunch of things going on. Women protesting and finally getting the vote. Clearly, everything was going to hell. So, the fundamentalist backlash produced the Monkey Laws, outlawing the teaching of evolution as a threat to old-time religion and therefore to society itself. Back to the 1950s, so we had the Cold War, Korean War, desegregation of the armed forces, Brown against Board of Education, murder of Emmett Till, so much going on. Meanwhile, as I said, no teaching of evolution. It was not in the textbooks. And then, in 1957, the Soviets launched Sputnik. The godless communists were suddenly ahead of us in science. So what the federal government did was it sent researchers out to universities across the country asking, hey, how do we regain our place as the global leader in science? The answer they kept getting was, teach evolution because it is the foundation of the life sciences. So it wasn't, in fact, until 1968, in a case called Epperson against Arkansas, brought by a 24-year-old high school biology teacher in Little Rock, that the U.S. Supreme Court held that states can't bar the teaching of evolution because the Constitution forbids government to tailor teaching and learning to the tenets of a religion. 1968. Civil rights movement, counterculture, Vietnam, just about to be the summer of love, turbulent times that gave fundamentalism a boost. Here, by the way, is Susan Epperson with John Scopes. Scopes lived just long enough to see the Epperson decision. But after Epperson, religiously motivated opponents of evolution responded with what they called either creation science or scientific creationism. Henry Morris, this guy, was an engineer who had an idea. And the idea was this: we can find hard evidence in the natural world to prove a literal interpretation of the Bible that God specially created the universe and all living things. Specially created, special creation, that is a technical term that means designed and made things complete in their full final form. One of Morris's proofs was flood geology. The Earth isn't 4.5 billion years old, it's just 5 to 10,000. This, of course, is a picture of the Grand Canyon. The stratified landforms that we see weren't formed over tens of millions of years. Instead, this photo is proof that a great flood covered the Earth for about 6 weeks. You do the math, right? As the waters receded, sediment settled in layers, the heavy stuff sank to the bottom, and that's what we got. You can, by the way, if you go to the Grand Canyon today, you can sign up for flood geology tours. Now, Morris's idea was this: we can't teach religion in the public schools, but creation science, it's science, it's right there in the name. So we can teach that. And he and his followers went around the country convincing state legislatures to enact balanced treatment laws. Can't outlaw the teaching of evolution, don't require it, God forbid, but if you do teach it, you've got to give equal time to this new scientific alternative. Now, in 1987, however, in a case called Edwards against Aguillard, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down these balanced treatment laws also. The court recognized that creation science is a religious view and not science, and the public schools aren't allowed to teach religion. That's a personal matter. Okay, so now what's a good creationist to do? How do you evolve? Out of creation science's ashes rose intelligent design, which brings me to one of the cases I did. You've heard some about the Kitzmiller case. I was on the legal team for that case. Kitzmiller against Dover Area School District in 2005. Dover is a little town in central Pennsylvania, has one high school. In the summer of 2004, they needed new biology books. What they had were outdated because scientists are constantly learning new things, so the books have to change. And they also didn't have enough copies for every student to get one, so the teachers went and asked for this book, Miller and Levine's Biology, which at the time was used by 30% of high schoolers at both public and private high schools across the country. The current edition, by the way, is now used by about 51% of all high schoolers nationwide and 65% of the students in Texas. The Dover School Board, though, didn't like these books because, as a board member and the chair of the curriculum committee, a guy named William Buckingham, put it, the book was laced with Darwinism. The board decided that students should be taught creationism and wouldn't purchase a biology book that didn't do that. Now, at a board meeting, a public board meeting, William Buckingham defended by refusing to buy these books by saying this: "It's inexcusable to teach from a book that says man descended from apes and monkeys. With the finger wagging, I challenge you to trace your roots to the monkey you came from. This country wasn't founded on Muslim beliefs or evolution. It was founded on Christianity, and our kids should be taught as such." 2,000 years ago, he said, someone died on a cross. Can't someone take a stand for him? And that, of course, is what they did. The board decided to buy this book instead, Of Pandas and People, which was the intelligent design textbook. The science teachers balked. A bunch of parents were up in arms, but then the school received an anonymous donation of 60 copies of Pandas and put them in the science classrooms, and then the board adopted a change to the curriculum requiring that the 9th grade biology students get a 4-paragraph introduction to the unit on evolution and intelligent design. Problem solved. Here are a couple of paragraphs of that 4 paragraphs. Because Darwin's theory is a theory, it continues to be tested as new evidence is discovered. The theory is not a fact. Gaps in the theory exist for which there is no evidence. A theory is defined as a well-tested explanation that unifies a broad range of explanations. That sentence, that one sentence, was written by the science teachers, and it's in fact correct. The rest of it... Anyway, then it goes on. Intelligent design is an explanation of the origin of life that differs from Darwin's view. The reference book Of Pandas and People is available for students who might be interested in gaining an understanding of what intelligent design actually involves. The science teachers refused to read that statement, walked out in protest. So the school board had to send the deputy superintendent in to read the statement, and after he finished it, he announced, "There will be no other discussion of the issue, and your teachers will not answer questions on the issue." Great teaching, right? So we sued on behalf of 11 parents. With kids in the Dover schools. There were Protestants, Catholics, a Buddhist, non-believers, teachers, a nurse, a receptionist, a couple of folks who ran local businesses, a couple who taught their vacation Bible school at their church. Ordinary folks who cared about their kids, their community, and their religious freedom. Now it was fall of 2005, and just days before we filed suit, this hit the newsstands. We still had those back then. Was Darwin wrong? Uh-oh. So raced out to those newsstands to get copies. What was the answer? No, the evidence for evolution is overwhelming, right? The article explains that evolution is a theory, and then it says if you don't understand what things you've heard today, if you don't understand what scientists mean by a theory, and you don't know much about evolution, you might be inclined to think that it is just a theory. Language from the school board used. When scientists say theory, they don't mean I have a hunch, or I have a guess, or I have a theory that oatmeal cookies are more healthy than chocolate chip. I'm sure that's right. A scientific theory is an extremely well-tested explanation that unifies a broad range of observations. So, the article explains, relativity is a theory, gravity is a theory, heliocentrism, which is the principle that the Earth orbits around the sun and not the other way around, that's a theory too. What about intelligent design? Well, it is the view that some biological systems or organisms are so amazingly complicated that we just don't believe they could have evolved gradually through natural selection. The idea dates back to the Reverend William Paley in 1802. Suppose, he said, you find a watch lying in a field, not an Apple Watch, and you see that if you take it apart and you look at it and you see if you remove any of those little bits and bobs, the darn thing just stops working. So, he said, you infer that it was designed and built by an intelligent agent. Same thing, he said, when you look at the human heart or the human eye, designed and built by an intelligent agent. Somebody with a plan and a blueprint. This was Paley's theological argument for the existence of God. Now, the problem with calling that theological argument science is that science limits itself to natural explanations for natural phenomena. The scientific method requires us to seek explanations that can be tested, repeated, falsified. If we can't observe something, see, feel, hear, smell, taste it, as scientists, we can't study it. An untestable idea, and this is important, an untestable idea may be true, or of course it may be false, but science can't tell us one way or the other. By contrast, intelligent design, according to the National Academy of Sciences, makes a claim of supernatural intervention that's not science because it's not testable by the methods of science. Intelligent design uses lots of scientific-sounding jargon, but in the end it invokes a supernatural cause. Supernatural, above or outside the natural world, the divine. Science can't invoke God to explain things because that requires a leap of faith, which is the province of religion. This could in fact be true. Science can't shed any light on it one way or the other. So the question in the Kitzmiller case was, is intelligent design science or is it religion? Now, to show that it's religion, we started with the book Pandas. And here's how Pandas defines intelligent design. If you can keep this one up for a minute. This slide and the bunch of the ones that follow were our actual exhibits from the Dover trial, by the way. So it says, intelligent design means that various forms of life began abruptly through an intelligent agency with their distinctive features already intact, fish with fins and scales, birds with feathers, beaks, and wings, etc. Special creation, that term I gave you before. Now, Pandas was first published in 1989. It used this same definition, but we knew that the manuscript had been under development for a long time. So we used legal process to get the old drafts from the publisher, a group called the Foundation for Thought and Ethics, which is a Christian apologetics group in Dallas. And we found out that in earlier drafts, this definition had been a bit different. Creation means that various forms of life began abruptly through the agency of an intelligent creator. You get the idea. In fact, we went through and had an expert go through and count up the uses of creationism in intelligent design, and here's what we found. That pattern of substitution repeated more than 100 times. If you're wondering, by the way, what that is, that's the middle of 1987, between the early 1987 draft and the later 1987 draft, when the Supreme Court decided the case Edwards against Aguillard, holding that it's unconstitutional to teach creation science in public schools. Now, this was, in fact, before most people had word processors, so there were some mistakes, like this one trying to replace creationists with design proponents, so it's hard to read, but the basic metabolic pathways of nearly all organisms are the same. Is this because of descent from a common ancestor, or because only these pathways can sustain life? Evolutionists think the former is correct. See design proponents accept the latter view. So the names change, but the story is always the same. Because this is ultimately a fight about names, labels, control of language to get creationism into the public schools without getting into legal trouble. Now, the local newspapers in Dover ran hundreds of articles and editorials and letters to the editor reporting and talking about how the school board was pushing creationism at its public board meetings. The school board insisted that those papers, that was all made up. William Buckingham, whom I told you about before, that board member who said all the statements I read by him at the beginning, he said those were false. I never said any of those. So at trial, one of my co-counsel questioned Mr. Buckingham about it. And let me summarize what Buckingham said. I never talked about creationism. No other board member talked about creationism. Nobody ever used the word creationism, not in public board meetings or to reporters or even in private conversations. Didn't happen. The testimony went on for a long time. This is just a little slice. So then my co-counsel asked, well, what about those newspapers? Those articles quoting you? Didn't read them, never saw them, nobody told me about them. Yeah, the paper was delivered to my porch, but I didn't read it. But then there was this clip that we played from the local Fox News affiliate, which will show Mr. Buckingham on his way into the school for one of those school board meetings.
The book that was presented to me for biology was laced with Darwinism from the beginning to the end.
William Buckingham is head of the curriculum committee for the Dover School District. He's also a board member. He strongly believes creationism needs to be taught in the classroom.
My opinion that it's okay to teach Darwin, but you have to balance it with something else, such as creationism.
So my colleague, that was you speaking, wasn't it? Well, what happened was I was walking from my car to the building, and here's this lady, and here's a cameraman, and I had on my mind all the newspaper articles saying we were talking about creationism, the ones he didn't know existed. And I had it in my mind to make doubly sure nobody talks about creationism. We're talking intelligent design. I had it in my mind, and I was like a deer in the headlights of the car, and I misspoke. Pure and simple, I made a human mistake. What about those 60 copies of pandas that were anonymously donated to the school district? Well, it turns out that Mr. Buckingham, same guy, had stood up in his church on a Sunday morning, held up a copy of Pandas, I sometimes bring one with me, I don't have it today, and told people that they needed to contribute to buy those books to help because we have to save these kids for Jesus. So Buckingham collected the money, wrote a check, gave it to the school board president, a guy named Alan Bonsall, who, to give to his dad, you can see it's to Donald Bonsall, and it says in the bottom there, if you can see, for Of Pandas and People, or Of Pandas books, excuse me. Donald Bonsall bought the books and made that anonymous donation. Everybody knew what was going on. Here's a letter to the editor by a guy named Michael Freet, who's a community member who supported the intelligent design policy. And it's one of many things we pointed to in the trial. I applaud the Dover Area School Board in backing intelligent design. Seems people want to take God out of everything. It's high time to put God back in our lives and inform others of what he has to offer. Try God. If you don't like him, Satan will gladly take you back. Now, Mr. Freet is sure that his religious beliefs are right and that anybody who doesn't share them is going to hell. But I want you to compare that to the testimony of one of the 11 parents I represented. I'll give you a little slice. Her name is Cindy Sneath. Cindy and her husband run an appliance repair business in Dover. Their 7-year-old at the time, son Griffin, loved science. Still does, graduated college a few years ago. Cindy thought Griffin could grow up to make important discoveries about the world or cure a horrible disease and save lots of lives. She wanted him to get an education that would allow him to do that. So here's what she said. Well, you know, as a parent, you want to be proactive in your child's education. I mean, obviously, I'm not an educator. I have no big degrees. I want to be proactive, but I depend on the school district to provide the fundamentals, and I consider evolution to be a fundamental of science. And in my mind, intelligent designer is a synonym for creator, and you know, that takes a leap of faith for me, you know? And I think it's my privilege to guide my child in matters of faith, not a science teacher, not an administrator, and not the Dover Area School Board. So the incredible judge in the case, whom you'll hear from in just a little bit, He was appointed by George W. Bush, who's supported by Senator Rick Santorum of Pennsylvania, one-time Republican candidate for Congress. When it was announced that he would be the judge, it was announced on the radio and we all heard it, the intelligent design crowd responded by really crowing. And there are some of those postings still up on the web. Because for them, this isn't law, it's politics, it's about power. He's one of their good old boys. They had him in the tank. But it turns out that in just an absolutely magisterial 139-page opinion, Judge Jones applied the law. He ruled that intelligent design is not science but religion, so it can't be taught in the public schools. And he explained this: the citizens of the Dover area were poorly served by the members of the board who voted for the intelligent design policy. It is ironic, he said, that several of these individuals who so staunchly and proudly touted their religious convictions in public would time and again lie to cover their tracks and disguise the real purpose behind the ID policy. Now, the trial got a lot of attention. There were, in fact, among other things, lots and lots of books written about the case. Here are just a few of them. That one's my favorite. But the folks on the other side started writing too. So here is the intelligent design proponents. It's an absolutely scurrilous attack on Judge Jones, on him personally. And then there was, for instance, this book that was written to replace pandas, substituting the term sudden emergence for intelligent design to pretend that it doesn't cry out with the question, who's the designer? This is one of my favorites, though. So this is from a website for a movie called Expelled in 2008. In it, Ben Stein, do you remember Ben Stein? He had Win Ben Stein's Money as a game show. He was the teacher in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I went, Bueller. Before that, he was actually a speechwriter for Richard Nixon. Now, Ben Stein goes around in Michael Moore style, exposing a vast conspiracy. Darwin is responsible for the Holocaust and Stalinism and every horrible thing that's happened over the past 150 years. He ticks them off. And Stein says in this movie, there are hordes of serious scientists out there who want to study and teach intelligent design, but big science is keeping the truth from us. Big science. Like big tobacco and big oil. You get the idea, right? A powerful worldwide cabal to keep the truth from us. Why? Well, he explained, if you're in a cushy post as a professor getting rich on peddling the snake oil of evolution, then you'll be out of a job if somebody exposes that it's all a big hoax. Now, Stein in his movie didn't actually explain what intelligent design is. He just says there's a controversy here, so we need to allow equal time to both sides. That's democracy. That is basic fairness. Sound familiar? Henry Morris all over again. Teach the controversy is the stock phrase. Now, after Kitzmiller, the law was clear that is unconstitutional. But today, the U.S. Supreme Court has changed the meaning of the First Amendment in two recent cases, so everything is kind of up for grabs. Sorry, I didn't bring slides on these, and I should have, but the two cases are, one of them is Kennedy against Bremerton School District, which you might remember, it's just from a couple of years ago. The case about the public school football coach who had the prayers on the 50-yard line with the students and the school district was trying to stop him. I actually represented the school district in the Supreme Court also. The Kennedy decision did two things. First, the Supreme Court said, all those legal tests that we've had in place for, depending on how you count, 50 or 75 years or maybe 200, forget all those pesky tests and the conclusions that they lead to, no prayer in public schools, no teaching of religious doctrine in public schools. Instead, look to history and tradition to decide what's constitutional. So presumably what this means is that if the court can find somebody, sometime, someplace who did something religious in the public schools, that means it is constitutionally permissible for all of us all the time now. The second thing that the Kennedy decision did was that the court held that this public school football coach, who had for 8 years delivered homilies, little sermons, prayers to the kids on the 50-yard line at the center of the games right after the game, and now was having audible prayers, taking a knee, but being surrounded by the team and saying prayers at the end of the field, the same time, the same place, that was personal, private, religious conduct that the coach has a constitutional right, free exercise right to. So what does that mean now for the personal, private conduct of giving the, talking about evolution, teaching about evolution in your science class, but holding a Bible and saying, truth, here, right here. Real case, by the way. Finally, last night, Annie Laurie mentioned the Mahmoud case that the Supreme Court just decided a few weeks ago, having to do with the LGBTQ inclusive curriculum in Montgomery County schools, where my kids go, by the way. The Supreme Court held that parents who are bringing a religious challenge to some storybooks have a constitutional right to opt their kids out of things in the public school curriculum that threaten their religious beliefs. And so if there are enough parents who want to opt out of something that they don't like, it becomes impractical to teach the subject, because you got to do something with all the rest of the kids. I guess that's just too bad for the rest of us. Now, make no mistake, there are plenty of parents who see evolution as a threat. So this is where the fight is going to be now. And hang on, because it's gonna be a bumpy ride.